where all of this terrible stuff happens, and then they get to turn around and say, well, nobody said anything. You know, everyone was clearly okay with us regulating your uterus because no one said anything. So we have to ensure that that voice is present, that that message is present, that our faces are present. Because, you know, even though we might not be able to stop it, we'll be able to reference that in 16 when we get it all back. So what I was really supposed to highlight, and again, you're going to hear much more about this and the various issues that are coming up from two panels in the afternoon. You're going to have a lobbyist panel, and you're going to have a legislator panel. So you're going to hear in much more detail what are really the key issues that we're facing this legislative session. So I'm just going to go over very briefly what I have seen and what various organizations across Nevada are focusing on to provide that voice. So first and foremost, every single progressive value that we have will be challenged. Everything, all of it, is going to be an issue. So that's just the environment that we're in. And so really at this point is kind of narrowing down which are the ones that have the most activity that is occurring on them. From what we've seen so far, and I will start out by saying this, there is a bright spot. The governor is very committed to funding education. And I'm actually very, very proud of what was accomplished during the campaign season, even though, you know, Democrats in particular took a pretty hard hit this last cycle. What we did manage to accomplish, particularly in my campaign as well, is we did not let up on the education funding message. When everyone would tell me, why are you talking about education? The lieutenant governor has nothing to do with education. I would say, because I can. And I continue to harp on education funding and having to make that a priority. And then lo and behold, all of a sudden, my opponent and everyone under the sun was talking about education. This is a good thing. It's a good thing because that made it a priority, and the governor has fully committed to trying to find more funding for that. Now, that's kind of where the silver lining ends. Because one, it's not a given, right? We still need 2/3 vote. And for those of you who I don't assume that anybody knows anything about the legislature, so I'll explain just a little bit. In each house, you're going to need 2/3 of the body instead of just a regular majority vote to get anything passed that has money attached to it. Whether it's a fee, whether it's a tax, whether it's whatever. That sometimes serves as an advantage to the minority because they can withhold their votes. And this is where, the negotiating and the horse trading and all that stuff is going to happen towards the end of session, because ultimately no money bill is going to get through session unless Democrats also support it. So that does give us an advantage in that respect. That being said, if there's no money attached to any of these bills, they're probably going to go. Now, as far as the education funding is concerned, we have to be very, very vigilant about how we collect that money. Because even though we're talking about reforming the system, we have to ensure that it's not on the backs of the everyday worker. We have to ensure that this isn't based on an increase in the sales tax, and an increase in this tax, and an increase in that tax that ultimately burdens disproportionately our community that is either low income or even middle income, while the big business in this state continue to get a scot-free ride, which is how it's been for a very long time. So we do want to make sure that we stay very active and vigilant on that discussion, because the way that that tax package ends up looking at the end is going to be very, very important for everyday hardworking Nevadans. So we have to pay special attention to that. Now, the other areas of focus that we've seen the most activity on, first and foremost, is labor. So collective bargaining, prevailing wage. Now, for those of you who don't understand what prevailing wage is, really it's just a working wage. It's assuring that on public works projects, for example, school construction, that we hire people who can take care of themselves on that wage. No one can take care of themselves on an $8 an hour job. So that's exactly what they want people to do. Why? Because it benefits big business. And unfortunately, that just is the attitude that Republicans and Nevada, unfortunately, as a whole has really had for a while. So in that respect, prevailing wage, they have already included it for the school construction bond bill, so that we can actually construct schools, but in it, they don't want prevailing wage, which means that people would not have to, the contractors would not have to pay living wage. They could pay $7 an hour, and guess what? What skilled worker is really going to work for $7 an hour? So it's a huge issue. Collective bargaining in and of itself is also being attacked. So the ability for people to even get together and form a union is going to be attacked. We've already seen bills that address this. There are no less than somewhere between 7 and 10 bills, all collecting various aspects of the ability for people to either get a living wage or to come together and form a union, or just to be able to demand. As you all know, in Nevada, we are an at-will state. And what that means is that if you're not in a union, you don't have protections as an employee that are more expansive than what the federal government says. So basically, if you're not discriminated against your religion, your sex, those things that are protected under the federal law, you can be fired at will for any reason. We don't like how you look today. We don't like what you said yesterday. As long as it's not, protected religious speech, I just don't like you, period, today, fine. People can do that. Perfectly acceptable, unless you're protected under a collective bargaining agreement. And that's why these things matter. Because you literally have an unevening playing field when you are essentially forced to endure sometimes, abusive environments simply because you are not protected in any kind of way. They're threatening to take that away. And quite frankly, if the governor, and I will say that as far as your activity is concerned, we really do have to consider him a stopgap. Look, I've always worked very well with the governor. I was actually one of the most effective legislators in Carson City, and it was all under a Republican governor. And so he has been reasonable, and I have worked with him very well in the past. And so I know that he will at the very least listen. And so we have to take advantage of that, and we have to try. And we have to continue to keep that line of communication open, because if these bills do make it through both houses of the legislature, the only thing that we have going for us is the possibility that he might veto it. So keep that in mind as you go, again, throughout the rest of this day and tomorrow, that working with the governor is something that we have to focus on and remember that he has been reasonable in the past. And so hopefully he will continue to be reasonable on some of these issues. The second thing that I want to highlight is consumer protection and access to justice. We already saw that the Republicans fast-tracked a construction defect bill. Now, a lot of people might not think that matters to them. What it matters is that it's them getting their nose under the tent. Because ultimately, what we've seen in other states is it's far more beneficial for insurance companies, and essentially big business if you're not allowed to sue them. And their argument is that ultimately reduces the cost of their insurance. Well, that's not a true argument, because what we have seen is that it increases their profits and they keep it. They do not pass on those savings to the consumer. And we have studies in Texas where it is the most restricted access to justice in the entire country because of their laws, where you saw only a minimal decline in their policy costs for the doctors, for the folks doing business, even after you saw a substantive decrease in the amount of lawsuits that were filed for medical malpractice, for personal injury, for construction defect, everything under the sun. And what that means is if something happens to you, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to find a lawyer who will take that case, because it is so hard to actually sue for it. They are restricting access to justice. And they